welcome everyone. My name's Dave Jones, and Lisa and I are thrilled to have the opportunity today to share some thoughts and ideas with you around why searching is easy, but finding seems to be a lot harder. And to provide a little structure to the whole affair, we've broken the webinar down into three main areas. So in the first section, I'm going to share some results of a piece of research that we did earlier this year into this exact topic. And we'll draw some conclusions about the state of search within DAM at the moment. Then Lisa will take the floor, and she's going to provide you with some simple but very effective ways in which we can start moving to finding, as opposed to just endlessly searching. And finally, we're going to hand the floor to you in the Q&A session. As David mentioned, you've got the ability to ask away while the session's in full swing, and we will do our best and we'll try and answer as many of your questions in that final session as we can. But before we dive into the main content, we're going to take a quick poll of our audience today. And we're really going to start asking you, and you'll see on the screen at the moment, how do you search for content? So you'll see on the screen at the moment 5 options. I use the search bar, I manually browse folders, I search multiple places until we finally find that content, I search email or collaboration, and the last one, which is quite interesting, is I just ask somebody else. So if you'd like to select one of those for the primary way in which you search for content within your organization, we'll give you a few minutes. There's quite a few responses coming in at the moment, and some interesting responses. We'll give you a few more seconds, and almost 3/4 of you have voted. So I'm sure there's some statistics about the fact that 80% of statistics are lies, but I won't bore you with those today. And that's quite interesting. We had 78% of you voted, and then it went back to 77%. So someone's obviously changing their mind out there, which is really devious. Okay, we'll give you a few more seconds. All right, and I think at that point, let's close the poll, if we can do, and let's take a look at some of these results. Okay, so what did you guys say? Well, 59% of you, almost 60%, used the search bar. Okay, interesting. And I'm not going to dive into too much detail and try and psychoanalyze these results at the moment, but we'll just compare them to some of the results that we saw in a few seconds. Interesting that only 9% of you manually browse folders. And maybe that's more to do with the third answer than anything about the second, but you search multiple places. 28% of you search multiple places until content is finally found. And we see that a lot. You know, a lot of people have to go into different silos and different repositories to go find the content just because it's spread all over the place. None of you search through email or Slack or your collaboration tools. Now, that is interesting, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. And boy, you guys are good. Only 4% of you ask someone else to go and find the stuff for you. Not sure I believe you, but we'll take a look at why I'm saying that in a little while. Okay, thank you very much for playing with me with that. Let's flip back to the slide deck and we'll start walking through and take a look at how they relate to a survey that we asked, as I said, a little bit earlier this year. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about that survey where we asked 1,000 creative business people how they work with content and how they search for content. Okay, so first up, just to keep those of us across the pond happy, we surveyed a mix of people across the US and the UK, or Great Britain, as we show on the slides. Took around about an 80-20 split in the end, just to get some diversity in there. We also took a variety of age ranges, as you can see from the slide. So we took 25 through 34, 35 to 44, and much as I hate to say it, 45 plus, which is my age group. And as you can see, we've got a good spread of ages there, again, to ensure that our results are statistically sound, if nothing else. And finally, we also made sure to talk to people at different career levels, at different roles within the organization. So let's be clear, we were primarily focused around roles in creative, marketing, and sales. But we looked at individual contributors, at managers, at directors, all in companies of over 100 people. So we excluded the very, very small companies, but basically took a pretty good cross-section there. So what did we find? Well, we found quite a bit, not surprisingly. First thing is that people prefer to search. And you guys have shown us exactly that. What was it? 59% of you said that you use the search bar. Well, our users were a little bit more spread out, probably because we gave them the choice to select multiple options here. The interesting thing, though, is that if they can't find something quickly, then they'll go and ask someone else to find it for them. And that was why I was slightly surprised that only 4% of you said that you asked someone else. Again, if we'd have given you more than one option, I'm sure that would have come up a little bit higher. As you can see, a smaller number used the traditional way of browsing, but actually a much higher number than we saw in the poll a little bit earlier. And that's really just going through a folder structure or a network drive to go and find what they're after. Interesting, but not earth-shattering, right? And certainly not shedding much light at the moment on why searching is easy but finding is hard. So let's dive into a little bit more detail. Well, more interesting, I think, is the fact that age plays a big part in how you search for content. The older, some would say wiser among us, i.e. the over 45s, basically ask people for information. We use Slack, we use email, and we use something bizarre to the youngsters, I'm sure, that actual physical interaction to get what we need. Very old-fashioned. The under 35s, however, search. And it's possible that we've got a lot of you on the webinar today. So what the under 35s are used to. It's what they prefer to use. So just think about that from a systems perspective for a second. You likely have both groups, both age ranges working within your organization. So simple logic tells you straight up that you're going to need at least 2 different ways to find content to satisfy both of those job groups. But it doesn't stop there. Job level or role within the organization also has a bearing on this. And there's a number of interesting things here for me. Firstly, managers tend not to search as much as other roles. Why? I don't know. All of their content seems to be within those email or Slack or those productivity tools. That's where they work. That's where they get their information from. Individual contributors and directors, on the other hand, do search, but both of those groups quickly pass off that searching to someone else if they can't find what they need. And finally, directors are the most likely to browse for content. And perhaps that's because many of those are in those upper age ranges. Many of those are the age ranges that still tend to browse. They still use the traditional ways, the ways that they've learned and used for many, many years to find their content. Okay, so some quick takeaways so far. Number 1, there isn't a universally preferred way to locate content. Well, life would be boring if everything was the same, right? And it's no different here, despite what our IT systems might hope for. And secondly, content is strewn all over the place in these different systems. And we better get used to it because that isn't changing. So we need to find a better way to find content and a way that empowers all of these different types of search. Now that's going to be quite a challenge. And there's a couple more survey findings that we need to look at that are going to make it even more of a challenge. So, as we said, it appears that irrespective of the method of searching, a lot of us just really aren't able to find. And as a result of that, almost 3/4 of the people that we surveyed said they recreate content even though they know it exists, but they can't find it. So they have little choice but to recreate it. Oh, and by the way, 72% say that they actually ask someone else to recreate it. They don't do it themselves. They get somebody else to do it. So it's a double whammy. And just think of the cost implications of that for a second. Not only have you got the time spent searching in the first place and not finding, and that can be quite considerable. But when you've realized that you can't find the thing that you're looking for, you've then also got the cost of recreating something that already exists. That's not an effective way to do things, whichever way you look at it. Okay, let's assume that you have found an existing piece of content, or that you've created a new piece of content. Not efficiently as we may have liked, but let's assume that you've actually got there. Well, we're not done with the craziness yet. Well over half of you, or half of the people that we surveyed, use rogue tools to store and to share that content. What I mean by rogue tools are tools that aren't provided by the IT department, tools that aren't sanctioned, that aren't part of your IT infrastructure, but they're just tools that you use to get the job done. Why do people do this? Well, they do it because the systems that they've been provided with are too difficult to use, or you don't know how to use them because you haven't been trained. Or indeed, you don't really know which system does what, so you're not quite sure which tool to use to do the job that you need to do. So people go rogue and basically use something that they know that they like and that they can use to get that job done. And this time, unfortunately, the elder generation are going to have to take some of the blame. Generation X and the baby boomers are the worst culprits here. They share content, they store content, they publish content using whatever tools they want, pretty much, irrespective of whether they're corporate approved tool sets. And it's not even close. They are way worse than any other age group at using the provided tools to do the jobs that they were intended for. But putting blame aside for the moment, all of these findings combine to create incredibly expensive problems. And I'm going to hand over to Lisa now. And Lisa, I've got a feeling that this story is about to get a lot worse before it gets better, right?
Absolutely, Dave. I have to admit, I spent 17 years in the creative realm, and I can tell you that each of these findings and the places where people are spending money certainly reflect in hard costs, but also in those opportunity costs that are created as part of the problem. So as Dave mentioned, what happens is that people are spending a lot of time searching. And of course, time is money. When you take the time to search for something and to continue to search and search and search throughout the day, you lose the time and the resources to do actually what they were hired to do. So imagine the cost that you're paying for a studio artist who should be doing layouts throughout the day and putting together InDesign files. But instead of doing that, they spend their day searching file shares to locate the content that they need to use. It's definitely not something that you want to do. And so again, this is reflected in the opportunity cost, where we also spend the time because we can't find, as we saw in our surveys, we have to recreate the content that already exists, that we know exists. We absolutely created it, but we still can't find it. And so what happens is that your content becomes trapped in a system that everybody is forced to use. So this isn't exactly a great idea. And anecdotally, what we have found is that agencies having to use a business's dam are actually starting to charge back to the business, to their client, for the time that they spend searching for content. And I gotta tell you that to me, that sounds a little bit crazy. And if I were the business, I'd probably try to find some other alternative. And so what we also find too is that the best ideas don't get reused. If you're not tracking some of the information around the content that you use, if you can't find it to repurpose it, then you're not using your creative content to the best of its ability. And lastly, there is a risk that is absolutely associated with not having information about your files or being able to locate files. So think back to those rogue tools that people may be using to share content. If you don't have any of the details associated with the content, well, good luck being sure that your users know when they can use it, where they can use it, and for how long. What ends up happening is that everything's okay until you get caught. And you end up spending millions and, well, thousands and millions of dollars or pounds or euros trying to get the information back into the system, out of the ecosphere, and away from problems.
Thanks, Lisa. So I think what we're saying here is that in most organizations, actually there's a bit of a dichotomy going on with who's filing this stuff and who's classifying this content and who's actually searching for it. So what you find is that low-cost resources typically classify or file content, and the high-cost resources search for it. And ironically, this means that getting that filing step wrong, getting the piece that's done by the lower-cost resources, can actually be very, very expensive. Since typically what happens is that you classify something once, but you search for it many times. And when senior people search for something and don't find it, one person's problem can easily become a whole organization's problem, especially when that one person that can't find it then asks somebody else to find it and then decides that they need to recreate it, and that whole process kicks off and goes downhill. So these problems are getting more and more expensive all the time. So what are we going to do about it? Well, I'm going to give you some of the top level things that we can do before handing over to Lisa to talk about some more in-depth examples of how we can actually get this done. So very quickly, we need to provide tools that work the way that we work. We don't want to force our brains to do unnatural things to get our job done. We're simple beings, humans. We want things to work the way that we like and the way that is efficient, and we don't have to break things or fudge things to get it done. We also need to recognize the value in relationships. And by that, I mean the relationships between people, but also the relationships between content and how different pieces of content relate to different projects, relate to different teams, and so on and so forth. Thirdly, our tools should make things easy to do. They shouldn't be a hindrance. And unfortunately, more often than not, the systems that we have in place at the moment are actually hindering us and restricting us from doing work. Those tools also need to change as our needs change, right? We need to be agile. We need to adapt. Our business needs to do that. We as humans need to do that. So our software systems need to do that as well. And part of that is about needing to listen to our users. They're the ones who are using the tools. They're the ones that if they don't like those tools, as we've seen, they will use something else. And finally, let's get a little bit strategic here for a second. We need to think beyond one department. I know it's difficult, and I know that everybody likes to think within the realms of their own department and not think beyond that, but most of our process is actually cross departments, if not cross companies. So why can't our tools? Now, that's a very quick rundown of the key survey results that we found and how we can start to address them. But let's dive into a little bit more detail. And Lisa, I think I've given you plenty of challenges to try and attack there. How do you want to go about it?
Well, let me show you how we have tried to address some of these issues in terms of giving people the ability to actually not just search, but to find. And I think that we make a very fine distinction, and thank you, Dave, for the survey results. I got to say that a lot of the information wasn't really surprising. Again, having been in an agency for 17 years and then with Nuxio for quite a few, I can tell you that these are the sorts of problems that are coming up again and again. And so how have we looked at some of these issues to try and figure out what it is that we can do to help our clients and their business users do their jobs? And so first and foremost, we have to remember that there is not one single type of user. We have a very rich and diverse workforce across the globe, and we need to be sure that we are addressing each user's needs. As much as it would make things simple to say, no, this is our focus user and we just need to make sure that they can do it, that's really not realistic and something that can be done within a large enterprise. And so to Dave's point and to the survey results, we need to make sure that we're addressing a couple key issues. One, we need to make sure that we have a powerful search. And that's not just having full text search, it's also being able to look at information and the way that content relates to each other. And we'll take a look at some examples in just a few moments. And two, we can't forget about those browsers out there. Contextual browse, though, can be used to somewhat trick the user into getting to the information they need in a much quicker way than clicking through a 10-node hierarchical structure. So ultimately, what we need to be aware of is what is that information that users are trying to do to get their jobs done. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. We want users to do their jobs. And thirdly, we need to make sure that the applications that we're building are simple and that the way that we can share and distribute the content within users is very simple. Okay, so let's start off with that powerful search. So what we have here, and apologies, going through a full demo within a webinar is not exactly good for my mindfulness. So we've got a couple screenshots here, but I think you should be able to get some ideas directly from here. So what we have here is a search. So this is akin to a faceted search that you might experience in an application. And what we have here is that we have information related to the files themselves. As Dave mentioned, when we look at who is classifying information, we often see that it's coming in at one point in the system, and usually with people who are not necessarily the highest trained or with the most experience within the company itself. And so there's a saying within the metadata world, garbage in, garbage out. So you want to make sure that the information that you're getting about your files is as accurate as possible. And to that end, what we like to do is we'd like to use automation as much as possible. So, and I'll show you an example in a little bit, but wherever possible, take advantage of those enrichment opportunities for your metadata. I know not every organization can use external web tools and services such as Google Vision or Amazon Recognition, but when you can, they are very powerful to pick out information within files and objects and to then attach automation to them in the back end, okay? So what we see here in some of these images, you can see, and we'll take a look at that cold snow fashion image in just a little bit, but when that comes back from Google Vision, what we can do is we can identify if there is a celebrity within there. We can then create relationships to a talent object that might also exist within the application. That talent object might have more metadata associated around contractual information, dates for usage, where it can be used, etc. And now we can make a relationship between that talent object and the image object all at the same time. And with each of these touch points, we've created an area where we can create an easier search, whether that's through facets or whether that's through our next area here, which is the quick search. Now remember, we have quite a few users who have responded that really the way to their hearts is through a Google-like quick search. And so you can't just create a search bar and be done with it. There's more information that goes around the idea of being able to find. And for instance, that's in this case, showing a thumbnail representation or some other representation of that file. Then also showing the contextual information around that search term for where this term is being located within the actual objects themselves. And so you can see here in this result, I could either, well, I've got a user here, Julie Winter, or I've got a project that is focused on a winter sale, or I actually have images that have been tagged at some point with the property winter. And visually, I have an easy way of locating the content that I'm actually looking for. So we've taken some really quick looks at how search might be used. Let's get back to that next idea of how do we offer a browsing mechanism that is easy for the user to get through. So what we have here is actually a homepage that we've put together that gives me the contextual information and that contextual browse that I need to do to get my job done. So on this homepage, you can see that I have access to my recent projects. I can click directly into this project and get to work. I don't need to go through, as I said before, a multi-node hierarchical structure to actually get to the content. Usually what you find when you lay out hierarchies is that you develop to that one group. And this was something that Dave brought up as well, is that you can't design for a single group. When you do that, you make that one group happy, but imagine all of the other people who you're leaving behind because they don't think that way and their work is not organized that way. When you give this contextual information, you can bypass that hierarchical structure to give the user the information that they have and to put them directly into the hierarchy where they need to do their work. Okay, so it becomes more about visual or virtual hierarchies and more about business object navigation and not a standard tree. Okay. We can also use another trick, more along the lines of a hidden browse. And earlier I talked about creating those relationships between, say, a talent object and an image. In this instance, what we see is that same image that we saw before. We've sent it through Amazon recognition. We pull out information related to the object and the image itself. And then what we've created is a view directly on this object, and apologies, it actually is a very large page. I needed to get into a smaller area here. But imagine, if you will, that I've got my picture, and directly under that, I've got this more like this capability. So again, we're taking the enrichment that exists external to the system and really putting it to work. Okay, and that's not to say that it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we also present AI models and learning models where we can train the system to actually understand the content that we bring into the system. For instance, if we had a product object related to this beautiful winter sweater, then we could have a product view directly related to this object as well. Okay. And ultimately, what I've created from this view is a pivot or hidden browse for my users to be able to locate content that is very similar. And lastly, we get into the idea of making sure that our applications are simple, secure, and easy in terms of sharing and collaborating. So yes, the sharing needs to be secure and it needs to be easy. So in terms of having an application, being able to share through collaboration, whether that's through workflows, whether that's through commenting, or even review and approval, it needs to be something that exists directly within the system. David mentioned earlier too, the idea of being able to have cross-department work. Within this system, we take advantage of those groups that exist, and we're able to assign roles and users to objects to make sure that the work gets done. In this view here, what we've done as well is gone back to that idea of presenting information that I need to know now to be able to get my work done. So in this view on the left-hand side, what we see is that I have been assigned a task. I've got my badge there showing that I have one new task. And directly from this view, I can see what that task is, what it applies to. And when I click on it, you can see that I've got all the information that I need directly from that next view. So I can share and collaborate. This is a review and approval, so I could annotate directly here on this object. I've got all of this information here. And oh, guess what? This information is all indexed. And when information is indexed, information can be searched. And so those become points and touch points for being able to actually find the content. And I can imagine some discussions that happen within companies where you say, you know, I don't exactly remember who worked on that, but I remember we had this one picture. It was a girl in a hat, and she was going through, and oh, Bob had this comment that we needed to get rid of the flare from the camera. And so if somebody had annotated this object with that information, we could do a search on that and be able to return the content itself. So giving multiple ways in order to be able to locate and find the content. It's not all about the title. It's not all about the worker. There's so much more information that is available to us directly within the files and the flows themselves. Okay? And lastly, we also talk about the idea of being able to show me the content where I work. And what we see here is actually, we've got Photoshop open here. And within that JPEG, within Photoshop itself, we actually have an integration that shows the content as it exists within the repository. We have some slightly simpler search mechanisms, but again, the idea is the same. I have access to the content where I work, and I can do my work directly from those applications that I'm familiar with and continue to use on a daily basis. And so in this example, we show an Adobe Creative Cloud integration, but imagine throughout having integrations directly within those productivity tools that are used on a daily basis, whether that's email, whether that's Slack, or whether that's some other collaboration tool that you and your colleagues are used to using. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Dave for a really quick summary.
Lisa, thank you. That was fantastic. There's some great content in there and some great ideas. And I'm just looking at one of the questions that's come in, and I think now is a good time to respond to it. Someone's asked that, or said that what we're talking about assumes that whatever system you have allows this level of granularity. And without wanting to sound crass, it does. There are challenges, there are limitations within many of the systems that exist at the moment. That said, I think there are little tips and little tricks and a mentality and a philosophy of trying to make this easier that can be applied to any system. You know, talking to users, making sure that you understand the relationships between users and between different pieces of content and between pieces of content itself. Those techniques and those approaches, for me, like I say, can be used within any system. So I think that was a good time to drop that in. So before we dive into the Q&A session proper, let's recap very quickly what we've talked about. And I'm not going to dive back into the specific survey results themselves, but basically we found that people search for things in many different ways, right? We found that in our search results, 60% of you use the search bar, 28% of you are searching all over the place to try and find information, and those honest 4% go and ask somebody else for it. So as a result, we need to have multiple ways for people to find things. But all of those ways need to be powerful enough to actually find what we're looking for and easy enough for anyone to use. And that's often the catch-22 in our current systems, right? We've either got very, very powerful systems that are incredibly difficult to use, or we've got incredibly easy to use systems that provide rubbish results. So some of the tools and techniques that Lisa showed show that this can be done. And that's the final point that I want to leave you with here, really, is that the tools to deliver this do actually exist today. And they're being used in anger by organizations to solve these problems. So with that call to action ringing in your ears, if you like, I'm going to say thank you very much for listening to both Lisa and myself